Ready?
Yeah, we're ready. Let's go.
All right, I'm gonna hit go live here. All right.
All right, it's Friday, June 18th. It's been a few weeks. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Doug. How are we?
I think we're okay. New studio setup, no longer doing the same thing on one monitor. Actually, I have two computers driving this sucker this time around.
Oh,
So when
fancy.
I move my mouse or open a page, I shouldn't cause voice jitter for you. So the
That UI thread stealing all your CPU cycles.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like I for those who haven't tuned in a bit, like it's interesting to like honestly have when you have multiple graphics cards to try and balance performance threading and understand the nature of like intensive tasks and what it does to threading and it's interesting. Like you can really play around with it. I lost several hours just trying to see like what different things would do to the threading infrastructure. And I'm still not. I might be looking at the wrong place because I have
That is why we're
cameras and
friends, though.
screens and, I mean, it's fun to nerd out on stuff, right? That's half
It
the
is.
battle. All right, I got security. I got a smattering of stuff: security stuff, developer stuff, some SharePoint stuff, a little bit of Teams phones. I got it's a
That's
smorgasbord of stuff. What do you got going on this week?
usual suspects, man. Usual productivity, analytics, BI stuff. I always love marrying up Teams and Power BI, and I'm doing that today too. So
Yeah, and you got a little Visio you covering this week too?
Visio,
We
yes.
were
Taking
talking
an
back and
old.
forth. It was kind of on my bubble, and Todd's like, "Are you going to cover it?" I'm like, "I think you are." So
Ooh,
that is
I just turned into a blue
you
S.
did. You're not, you are now Skype man. It's okay. We can just we can just roll with our bad selves
That's
because the
fine.
content's still up. If it comes back, it comes back, right?
The blue
So
S looks better than me
that
anyway.
is.
So
There you're back. All right.
hey,
So
it's
yeah.
me.
Okay, let's talk. I wanted to cover this post because I have for the longest time talked about the value proposition of the Intelligent Security Association and the Security Graph API and the ability to do bidirectional security flows and do amazing security integrations and truly do workflows and dispatch tags. And there's all this power of the Intelligent Security Graph and the Intelligent Security Graph APIs and all those capabilities. And then we have this Intelligent Security Association, which allows partner people to, basically come together and build interesting things. And it was like a week or so ago. No, just in the last few days. Yeah, a couple weeks ago. Odix and Microsoft announced this really interesting partnership using the API about for against malware with a free firewall license. Now, I would go check this out, but I think it's more interesting from an example because do you know what CDR is, where they do content disarm and reconstruction?
I was gonna say that. Yes.
Okay, essentially, it is the deconstruction. Instead of scanning a file for malware, you basically say everything is dangerous, so I'm going to disassemble it, take the only known safe components, like the body and whatever it is, to go out the XML DOM of an Office document, right? There's certain portions of it that are inherently have the ability to be weaponized, and other parts that
Yep.
simply do not. And so what they do is, with the intention of preserving, 99% of the fidelity of capabilities and 100% of the fidelity of content, they reconstruct it on the far side. It just never comes in to your environment. So it's a cool thing. I mean, there's a lot of technology around this stuff. And so what they did is they essentially used the intelligent security graph, the graph API, and in conjunction with Exchange Online and Microsoft Sentinel, and they do this really cool API integration for construction and deconstruction of different document types. And you configure all this stuff on top of it. And they basically have a high performant interesting integration directly into Exchange Online security capabilities with with
Hmm.
with very low latency delay for integration using that security graph technology. So when we talk about the security ecosystem that we're trying to build, and there are people, F5 has integrations to this. Like if you go out there and look, there's a lot of people who have really cool integrations to the through the graph APIs into the intelligent security stack. And so I guess my point is it's really interesting to go browse around and see all the different security vendors who are part of this. And if you own one of them, you probably own a really interesting integration. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like there's
It does. That's
there's some
awesome.
interesting, and that was just one that popped up. And I'm like, that is really slick. And they talk about like their performance characteristics and everything else. So I spent like a little bit of time going around, going like, well, and here's our security product integration for it. So if you're using any of these tech, then there's some legit stuff for you around here. So that was thing one for me was I think you should really check out and leverage the integrations your other security products have with the Microsoft security stack entitlement you have to do great things.
That's great.
Okay.
Love it.
Next up, continuing the stuff, did you see or check out like all I put the post in for the Microsoft Graph teams build announcements? they consolidated.
I have not gone through this
They
post.
consolidated them all into one thing, which I thought was pretty cool because we talked a little bit about some of these things, the channel messages, import APIs. You and I have been kind of going through this stuff, but this is a really quite lovely curated list of everything that's going on top of it, the adaptive card stuff, everything else, the graph connectors for things, the identity stuff around the authentication methods API and everything happening on top of that, the rich notifications for exchange capabilities, the graph data connect, the insights API, all sorts of stuff on top of it. So this is just a really good curated list of things that you and I have talked a little bit about over time that's really brought together, like into a, here's the current state of affairs as of the close of build, which I thought was pretty darn compelling from a capability standpoint. The one that I also thought I wanted to call out, and I'm not going to do much more than say you should go watch this, is they released a singular, one of many sessions, but a session that covered how to build across Teams, Viva connections, and SharePoint as a consolidated extension service.
Wow.
Which sort of puts a little meat on the bone of that previous post. You're like, well, so there's all this stuff. Like, why would I invest my time in that? Like, well, watch this, and you'll be like, ooh, shiny. And I got to be honest, have you had Viva topics start to show up for you internally?
I have, and it's really it's a delightful surprise every time.
I am okay. I know we work here and all that stuff, but we won't advocate. Todd and I don't advocate things we don't like. In case you haven't picked up on that, right? I had some stuff I was working on in the capacity of my role as the worldwide cross solution strategy lead. Anyway, I get tossed in these corporate rooms all the time, and everyone has their own initiatives and all sorts of stuff going on. And so it surfaced up like this portfolio of highly relevant crap for me. Right? Like, I mean, super targeted from a Viva topic standpoint. In like 10 minutes, I was able to ramp for a meeting, and I'm like, I had my moment of that thing is stinking useful, right? And I didn't have to do anything. Yeah. It just sort of came at me, right? It's like, hey, you know what I mean? Like if you're digging in on this, you may want to know I would have missed some people to involve in something. Like
I've had enough of those moments already to know this is a good idea.
This is a really good idea. And like sometimes you're like, well, I've had people, my friends who are the SharePoint people, like I could have assembled all those things and done all that stuff. I'm like, maybe, yeah. You can always say that, sure. Right? There's a GitHub repo in the toolbox, and we give you a
coulda, woulda, shoulda, right?
Right, but that level of back-end intelligence, the config, not code and build, the maintenance and ongoing feature extensibility. There's certain things like Power Platform that emerge into a category, and maybe they started out as free things you could do, but all of a sudden we realize it's going to take huge investments and time and engineering and an evolution to turn it into something that really matters, right? And I think this is one of those moments. Fascinating. So the Viva Connections things, we had Steve Wynn on for talking about, from Yammer, talking about the power of all this stuff and the telemetry, so all sorts of amazingness going on for there. I wanted to transition over now to the SharePoint roadmap pit stop they did on top of it. Remember there was the Yammer conversation insights when Steve was on? He talked to us about that. That's kind of got rolled up in there, and it's just a little status update on top of it. And there's also if you trail the surface links, or you go back in our show links from a few weeks back, remember we talked about the graph API for analytics? There's also some mentions to that, so you could pull that analytics into whatever you want to, right? Into a data lake or something, right? Or just blob storage, and then trend across it and do whatever you want to for long-running analytics, because we don't keep it long on top of that. Immersive Reader got direct integration into OneDrive. There's some migration stuff on top of it, and then a bunch of like export lists to CSV directly, so you don't have to go to Excel and then save them out on top of this. There's some nice refinements on top of that, and an updated sharing experience for lists. And by the way, did you know To-Do now supports sharing from personal to work and work to personal if your company permits it?
No. So what does that mean? I can collaborate with.
Well, you can essentially have. Remember, like if you're using the list, and the list app only lets you have sort of one account, right? Like on top of. So now you can basically see your grocery list and your work to do in a consolidated view. If administrators Okay. So the convenience of it is just like the user experience side of that, right?
For sure. And I definitely use To-Do for both personal and
I know
work,
you do,
so
but you had to kind of pick like how are you? And so there was some in February announcements. Now obviously there's some security boundaries around that decision, right? So I do wish that app would evolve to have multi accounts. So I could just switch my views or whatever it is. But in the interim, the sharing stuff works out pretty good on top of it. Microsoft List though got an updated sharing experience on top of it, which I thought was pretty cool for what you can have and on that stuff. There's also a bunch of new management settings for List they released on top of it. Recommended files in Office for it.
I've been seeing that
Comes up. Yeah, that's
yeah.
super useful on top of it, which is contextual, and eventually Microsoft Search and AI will continue to improve on top of that. Now, the OneDrive Sync admin reports, I want to call this one out again because it's heading towards, I think, probably its ship date. That's a guess on top of it. Because we had, how healthy is OneDrive out there? I had some customers, I'm relying on it, but what if it's not synchronizing, right? And so you can now troubleshoot those synchronization errors proactively across the OneDrive client, which was a huge thing for our customers to understand. Like, if I'm relying on this as my enterprise file protection for quote unquote local files, I can't have it offline for my CEO whose files I want to keep safe. It's pretty simple, right? Like how would that person know? Yes, they get the little sync errors, but how many of your users really pay attention to those, right? Like, I mean, some do, but OneDrive tries to be non-innocuous. You get an exclamation point, you have a sync error, and you're like, oh, I'm sure that'll go away if I leave it alone long enough. Well, maybe not.
I can't.
So
I can't function if I see I have to fix it.
A lot of people don't feel that way, Todd. Right?
I
just want to.
I won't be able to do anything.
I just want to assure you that is not the case.
I know. I'm a special case.
And then there was the OneDrive Sync admin reports. There's a little video session on top of that, and then the build announcements around the Fluid framework and everything else. The performance impact of the Fluid framework just simply cannot be overstated, right? That thing is amazing from a capabilities and integration standpoint. I got two more things. We announced the general availability for intelligent speakers for Microsoft Teams rooms. So what that comes with essentially is that Teams advanced intelligent speaker attribution. And notice you can have up to a 7 microphone array to get accurate transcriptions from 10 people from an identification standpoint.
10 people from one speaker?
You can have up to an array, so you can put them around the room, so you get better.
Okay.
That's the point. Is now you can have like a distributed speaker array on top of it. It's all powered by Microsoft Graph. Now, obviously, one speaker can do it too. I mean, it can get a handful of people, but if you put speakers around the room, then you have higher fidelity inbound audio ingestion, so you get better clarity of voice differentiation. Because Todd talking from far away to a speaker is not the same as having a speaker near Todd or a microphone near Todd, right? And so, depending on the size of the room and everything else, you can do all sorts of really interesting stuff on top of it. And they go into the privacy settings as well to say, of course, you can turn it on and off, right, for each meeting. And admins can turn off people identification. So if you're like, my privacy policies would never permit this, you don't have to use it. But if they do, it's pretty slick because you actually get that full per person attribution, right, as to, the far side, because it's pretty easy if Todd's far side, right, and you're a singular person on a headphone. Okay, I got you, right? That's Todd. But when there's a room full of people, now you can get speaker attribution from the other side. So it's cool.
Very, very cool. That's awesome.
All right. So anyway, so intelligent speaker report on top of it, and my last one for the day is Teams phones got some updates for a bunch of things, including background replacement. Only the out of the box stuff, but some other nice stuff. Also, live captions are now available for calls, so you can have captioning turned on the phone interfaces.
Nice.
Yep. Some usability improvements on all that kind of stuff, and then you can set present state on top of it for Boss Admin has some of that kind of stuff, and then you have like the if multiple contact numbers, you get the UI drop down cards. There's some voicemail card improvements, and one of my personal favorite dual tone multi frequency like DTMF reports are for early media scenarios. Essentially, we wouldn't pop the dial pad early enough for you occasionally to interact with services that were on like auto attendance, and now we do. So there's like some functional improvements and a whole bunch of feature usability improvements. So a smattering of stuff for me this week across the board. Next week, I'm going to unpack a little bit of Windows 10 May release admin capabilities and stuff you should know. For the I just didn't want to squeeze it in because I know I'm at my half point and I had to put something on the bubble, and I just hadn't unpacked it enough for myself. But I want to go over the the Windows management and log analysis stuff along with the May release Windows.
Well, what's the teaser? Like, what's the big hotness in the May?
It's actually just a lot of refinement.
Okay.
I guess that one of the cool things, like there's a lot of delighters in it, like external and ordinal control of external Windows Hello cameras. You might have seen Racinovich's post about going passwordless, so all the FIDO stuff comes of age in a big way. But it's really just, to me, there are a few things in there for that are of significance, but the biggest thing is a whole lot of stuff is coming to usability level and refinement level where you should go turn the stuff on. And that's where I really want to kind of do a roll up and say all this stuff coming together from a security management user experiential standpoint. Like there's a lot to unpack since the last time I talked about Windows, and I just want to spend a little time on it.
Killer. Awesome.
All right, so you, sir, are up on screen now.
All right. So, my Power BI peeps, we've been talking about this one for a long time. And I want to call this one out for a couple reasons. One, because there's some updated dates for the timelines around updating of classic workspaces in Power BI to the new workspaces, which aren't even really new anymore. And that's kind of my point. A lot of times, when we're talking to customers about software as a service, there's questions around versioning and how do they have control over changes and deprecation and all those kinds of things. Now, I like to point to classic to modern workspaces, and Power BI as a case study here, to really help customers feel better about how communicative we are and how we work with customers to do this on their own timeline. This has been a long time in the works, 2 years, something like that, and it's still going to be April of 22 before this whole saga is done. So we got a couple things coming up here in October. We'll have an upgrade all workspaces tool within the portal released to all tenants, and the ability to create classic workspaces will be removed from all tenants. You won't even have the choice anymore. You've had that choice to turn on and off for a while, and hopefully you've maybe turned that off. And then finally in April, the day has come. We're gonna do the final option and upgrade everyone to the modern workspaces, regardless of whether you've done so or not. And I don't think anybody could argue that we haven't given people enough notice here. It's been a long time in the coming. So this kind of walks you through some of the things that have happened. Some of these are past dates, and more information about what's coming. But again, I really like this as an example of how this is done right with versioning and big changes, because this was a big change, right? A lot of things in SaaS are small incremental, and a lot of them are big changes and architectural changes. And this was one of those where the workspace experience was so different. We just said, nope, we're going to have a V1 and a V2 type of workspace. And, eventually those V1 workspaces are going to be retired. So if you still have V1 workspaces out there, please go check this out. If you're not sure, please check this out. To make sure that you have the proper governance set up in your.
I'm assuming you can report on how many V1s you have.
For sure, and that's all in here too. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
I think we've done a really good job here. This is done right.
I just like to double check. I mean, if someone's like, "It's a report," go run it, right? And see how bad your problem is, and then do something about that problem. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I thought this one was cool. Here's the convergence of Teams and Power BI. If you're using the Power BI app inside of Teams, we now have an app to analyze your usage. And as I talk to more and more organizations, and Doug, I'm sure you're in the same boat. Every org I talk to is on some journey, some timeline of the journey on Teams adoption, ranging from a few people use it to we're fully self-actualized and using it to the fullest extent. A lot of people are, hey, we're using it for calls and chat and a couple teams. But this is really useful once you start to get broader adoption and you're maybe in quite a few teams, determining how you're using it, what teams are actually most useful for you, which could actually help you understand. The more you can understand how you work through data, the more you can adapt and change your work styles to be more productive, including like hiding things, turning things off. You have the ability to do that. So this one might be one of those moments where you take a breather and actually take a look at this and try to evaluate how you're working in teams. But I love the more access to data and insights that we have, including how we work ourselves. I'm all for it. So I thought this was really
what's
cool.
funny is I can only see from what I do now. I don't talk to individual customers anymore, so I can only see like the giant macro trends of things at an abstracted and anonymized level. But I would say that matches up with everything from my friends network that tells me.
Sure. Sure.
I mean, it's so
So
funny.
I mean, this is a wealth of information here.
Yeah.
We even have like some summarized textual information
Mm.
if that's more your jam. So love it. Cool. This one, just I'll touch real quick. This is some developer samples. A lot of our customers use Salesforce. A lot of our customers use Power BI. So here's some good dev examples of how to do that, because a lot of people are really trying to marry those two things up and giving everyone a singular UX. So check out those dev samples. Those are great. This is another kind of enhancement to data flows, where we've had this ability in data sets for a while where if you have a refresh failure, you're able to set up an additional set of people to be notified. You can now do that with data flows as well.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm like,
Yeah.
Tilt, what's this one good for? And now I know.
Yeah, non-owner. So here's basically what you end up with. It's like, so if you get a refresh failure, you can optionally select the owner, and you can optionally select other people as well. So really, really important. The other thing that I always love the pattern of these. These pattern of these posts where it's like basically, here's a quick 1 or 2 sentences on what a data flow is. Here's the thing we're talking about today, and here's what's coming next. So what's next is the ability to allow multiple editors and contributors to editing of data flows. So that's great. In addition to something that I'm really, really been waiting for is deployment pipeline support. So a lot of people are having a lot of success with deployment pipelines, but if you're using data flows, that's kind of been a little bit of a blocker. So those are coming as well. So I'm excited for that. All right, so here we go. Here's the Visio post that you teased. And I'll never forget, just a quick story, the first time I ever went to the Microsoft campus before I was an employee, we were on some kind of transit bus on the campus, and I saw the Visio team's office because they had some poster or something from the outside, and I'm like, there's the Visio team. That's where they sit. That's so cool. But Visio has obviously been around for quite a while, and so what we have here is we have coming a lightweight version of the web app to a broader set of M365 users. This is not the standalone Visio, which will still require Visio Plan 1 or Plan 2, but this is the ability to do quite a bit of diagramming right inside Office Online through the web browser. So, and of course, there's going to be integration with Teams here and collaboration and all the things that you know and love from an Office Online perspective. So, really excited to see this one coming. Do you do any Visio these days, Doug?
I do actually. We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do, for like process flows, and for I find it's important for a lot of the work I do to explain how things interact across and between teams and dependencies between things. And so I'm doing more Visio. What I found for a while is I was trying to do complex relational diagrams in PowerPoint, and I'm like, I must stop this, right? It's not the right tool.
You can get like to the level like 100, maybe 150 inside PowerPoint,
Yeah.
but then if you need to do something of any complexity, you need to bounce over to Visio.
Yeah, so I've graduated from the PowerPoint diagrams because you can get them into PowerPoint in like a hot second.
What is that called in PowerPoint? I can't remember what that feature. Smart art.
Yeah, you use smart art and then just connection points on them, but you can't add connection points. You can't, what I mean. So as soon as
they're fixed, they're pretty fixed.
Yeah,
for what they are, they're great, but they only get you.
Get you so far. So no, lately So lately I've been back in Visio world.
Love it, man. Well, there you go. Yeah, and Pete calls out in the chat like so smart to add to the licensing. It's like, yeah, I kind of agree. I think this one was. This one's a no-brainer. I'm glad it's there.
Yeah.
There we go.
I mean, diagrams are a thing. I mean, they just are.
It's a thing. And Visio is not, gosh, when did Microsoft acquire Visio? I don't know.
Long time.
Was it early 2000s? I don't remember.
Adding Visio makes sense. Like, there's another companion. Sorry to sidecar, but the Universal Print dropped its release a couple months ago, right? The Azure Universal Print service, which essentially gets away with print servers. Any printer that's compliant, or you can put a gateway server in place, and then you can just print from anywhere to anywhere, and you get like universal print entitlements, X jobs per month for every employee to use essentially the cloud print service. So you can print to corporate printers or do whatever the hell you want to from a printing standpoint. Universal print is one of those things that makes sense as an entitlement for Office users, right? This Visio stuff, another thing that just makes sense. Like, there's certain things you should be able to do diagrams and print. Yep, included.
For
Yeah.
sure. Well, and Pete calls out too. This is huge for SMBs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think of not just the large enterprise, but the small medium businesses that are going to be able to take advantage of the Visio capabilities. And I looked, and Visio was acquired. It was the first acquisition, I guess, depending on when you start counting the new century. It was January 7th of the year 2000. So
Wow.
So it's been 21 years.
He retired now.
Visio as a Microsoft product is old enough to.
He retired now, but I got to meet the person who who started Excel as a project, and its original charter was to exceed the market share of VisiCalc.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Which still runs on Windows, by the way. VisiCalc does.
Oh yeah, why not?
I mean, it's just unbelievable. All right. Nerding out. All right. So announcing Power Query data flows for Dataverse and Teams. That's a lot of words. Let's tease that apart. So if you're using Dataverse and Teams, which is a thing that we've talked about quite a bit, we're adding in the ability to bring in data through Power Query, which has been there in like the old CDS and Dataverse and things like that. This is I think at the end they kind of call this out. How do they call it? It's a lightweight version. So the number of data sources that you can bring in are somewhat limited. A lot of the things that you'd be doing in Dataverse and Teams, especially like things in OneDrive and things in SharePoint, right? So more than likely, you're going to be hitting some web thing, some file in OneDrive, or some list in SharePoint or Microsoft Lists. So I think this makes a lot of sense because once you need to bounce over to like a SQL server on-prem or in Azure using a gateway, you probably outstripped what you need to be doing inside of Dataverse in Teams anyway. So I think this is very reasonable. It brings a tear to my eye when I actually think about that now Power Query. There was this vision of Power Query everywhere back when Power Query was Data Explorer in Excel back in like the year 2013, something like that is when that first plugin started shipping.
Yeah.
And that's where it got its life. That's where its life began as a plugin called Data Explorer in Excel. And there was this idea that it could just be this way to ingest and shape data from and to a lot of different places, and that's being realized. It's everywhere from Dataverse and Teams to Excel to Power BI Online, through to even like enterprise developer tools like Data Factory in Azure. So it's rather exciting. I think Power Query is a killer piece of tech. So
yeah,
absolutely love this. All right, one last thing here: Power Automate Desktop June update. I love these. The ability to run desktop flows from another desktop flow. What more do I need to say? That's great. Now this one's pretty cool. If you're doing some RPA in RDP or Citrix, one of the ways to do automation tasks in Windows is to either do element selection or to do image, like OCR type of processing. If the desktop recorder detects that you're in Citrix, it's going to default over to image-based detection of elements. So now that's kind of automatic, and you don't have to.
That is just so crazy how far this has all come. This is completely crazy.
So, yeah. No doubt. We've been. I mean, you can immediately spot when we're really for investing for real, and this is like we're seriously investing here. This is awesome. I really love this.
Yeah.
And a couple last things here on Windows-related stuff. The use of environment variables is there, and also the ability to work with Windows services is there too. So a couple things there if you need to be automating some of those things from a Windows perspective. Oh, and we're also deprecating the Modi OCR engine as well. So if you're using that, be aware. But that is all I had, man. That's a pretty good week, I would say.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
So
I think from my takeaways, if you're using Teams, go check out the Power BI insights inside of the Power BI app inside of Teams to see how you're using Teams. I'm going to go do that and see what I learn about myself.
My top thing would be, I've done the FICAM architecture for framework around identity governance and lifecycle and everything else. And I really want people to think about healthy ecosystems around their security product integrations. Don't treat them like silos. Treat them like workflows with composition, right? Think about the layer of automation you can do from a workflow all the way down into these kind of systems. There's really no excuse not to be able to automate the stuff down and backwards, right?
Right.
You can really solve these complex workflow orchestrations and integrations to improve, a a lot of things, and I
Mhm.
security is such an outnumbered team that I really am basically trying to focus a little of my energies on how do we get security and admin operations to the same maturity level we have other things, right? So that we can focus
Yep.
those people on the tougher challenges, not the commodity challenges.
I agree. Love it.
All right, then it's 11 o'clock in the central time zone of the United States, where both Todd and I reside. We will be back next week for another shining Office Flash Friday.
Shining. All right. I love it. Cool. Cheers, everybody. Have a good
All right,
weekend.
everyone.